Hello everyone, my name is Huafang Li. In this short video, I'm going to introduce you a brief history of the nonprofit sector, especially in the United States. So the first thing is, why should we care about historical analysis of nonprofits? Why is an understanding of the history of nonprofits so important? Because to know the history, right? So it will make the present meaningful, and it also helps us understand why certain cultural, social, and political features are the way they are today, and what do they mean, and how they came about. And all these factors and features about nonprofit organization, how they influence people's interaction with nonprofit organizations and their relationship with government and the market. So the United States nonprofit sector, there's some legal foundations that draw from English law, especially a very old one, the English Poor Law and the Statute of Charity Use, both in 1601. And these both laws, they clarified the relationship between the government and the charity, and defined what kind of nonprofit or charitable activities are legitimate, and also made the trustees of charities accountable. Right. So without the law, you don't know who's responsible to whom and for what. But the law, both laws, they made it clear. And in terms of the history, right, we can't forget Tocqueville. In 1835, Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America, highlighted the feature of Americans to form voluntary associations to address social and political objectives. So basically, the idea about self-governance in the United States, which lays the foundation for American democracy. So nonprofits is a critical stone for the foundation of American democracy. And the nonprofit organizations in the United States, they provided and provide needed service such as schools, medical care, fire service, etc., etc. We will discuss more in future videos. So then you possibly want to know, so how about the modern nonprofit sector? Is this different from when the time Tocqueville wrote the Democracy in America, or is it still the same? Right, we would say the beginning of the modern nonprofit sector lay in early 20th century, right? Because of so many wealthy people, and charity and philanthropy became more formally organized. For instance, we will know all these great philanthropists' names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, etc. Right. So, and then you also have the endowed money for universities, libraries, etc. So the concept of a definable nonprofit sector, even though the whole sector have a very long history, but the concept, the definable concept, is relatively recent. So the Filler Commission, so in 1973 to 1975, this is kind of the first attempt to define the nonprofit sector, and then the giving in America, or giving in USA now, was the first one to characterize nonprofits as a continuing a recognizable sector of society. Right. And then after that, you have the expansion of the nonprofit sector. So in the 1960s and 70s, you'll see an increased government spending on social programs, especially with the Great Society and the War on Poverty, both issued by LBJ, right? Lyndon Johnson back then. So why this is relevant? Because government funds directly channeled to nonprofit organizations. And if you look at closely at the relationship, you possibly will find that some of the nonprofits would not be exist if without the government spending, right? So later on, you'll also learn that the government funding constitutes a major revenue source for nonprofit organizations in the United States, right? So much of the nonprofit sector today took from during this time. And you also have the community action programs, especially because of the war on poverty, right? So they want to maximize the feasible participations. So the federal government directly subsidized a lot of local community groups and later on formed nonprofit organizations to work on social issues because this is related to alleviate the poverty. So many poor people were funded to organize in their own communities and to fight poverty, right? And in the 80s, the then U.S. President Ronald Reagan spent also on social programs, but the funding was sharply reduced, right? Not only in the levels of government support, but also in different kinds of forms, right? So healthcare, higher education, welfare, etc., etc. So especially I want to talk about the higher education, right? So the government funds directs to colleges and universities decline sharply, and especially nowadays, it's continuing decline. So the higher education institutes, they need to figure out how they can increase their revenue. Most of them mainly rely on students' tuitions, like kind of the service fee idea, right? And also big donors, especially donations from corporations and from big donors. Now, today's nonprofit sector is important, of course, right? But not always resembled with the nonprofit sector as we know now. It's because it's a complicated, it's vibrant, but it's a complicated sector, right? But anyway, this is a fascinating sector with a multitude of potential and opportunities, either for research, for practice, and it's fascinating and it's amazing.